Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the vessel of a fallen star. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind on the rooftop was a liar. It whispered of freedom, of flight, of the endless, sprawling possibility of the city below. Izuku Midoriya stood with his hands clutching the cold metal of the safety railing, his knuckles white, and knew it was all a lie. The wind was just air, moving from high pressure to low, and the city was just concrete and glass, populated by millions of people whose dreams, unlike his, had a foundation to stand on. His own foundation had just been pulverized into dust. Be more realistic. The words weren't an echo in his memory. They were a fresh, gaping wound, torn open by the man he admired most in the entire world. All Might. The symbol of peace, the pillar of hope, the living embodiment of the dream Izuku had cherished for 10 agonizing, quirkless years. And that man, that hero, had looked at him with pity, not malice, but a weary, soul-crushing pity, and told him to give up. His legs felt like mismatched stilts, threatening to give way. His chest was a hollow cavern where his lungs used to be. Every breath was a shallow, painful gasp that did nothing to fill the void. The yellow backpack, usually a comforting weight, now felt like it was filled with lead. Inside, nestled amongst his school supplies, was Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The spine was worn, the pages dog-eared and filled with his frantic, hopeful scrawls. It was the testament to his life's work, to a future that would never come to pass. The paper felt heavier than osmium. It felt like a tombstone. All Might had left. He had leaped away, a gust of wind and a distant, booming farewell, leaving Izuku alone with the ruins of his world. For a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, he didn't move. He just stared. He watched the cars below, tiny points of red and white light, flowing like blood cells through the arteries of the city. Each one held a person with a life, a job, a family, a quirk. They were all part of the system, part of the world. He was not. He was an anomaly, a statistical error, a zero in a world of ones. He replayed the scene again, his mind a cruel projector. The sludge villain. Bakugo, his childhood friend, his tormentor, suffocating, his explosive quirk rendered useless. The heroes on the sidelines, unable to act. And then his own legs, his stupid, useless, quirkless legs, had moved. They had carried him into the fray in a suicidal, pathetic display of, what? Heroism? Folly? It didn't matter. It had accomplished nothing except to get in the way and earn him a scolding. All Might had saved them, of course. But the aftermath was the real disaster. The shocking revelation of his idol's injury, the skeletal form hidden beneath the muscle. The story of a battle he'd never known about, a wound that was stealing the symbol of peace from the world, bit by bit. In a foolish, desperate gasp for air in his drowning hope, Izuku had asked his question. The question, can someone without a quirk become a hero like you? He had needed a lifeline. All Might had handed him an anchor. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic. The sound of a door clanging open behind him made him jump. A building security guard, a man with tired eyes and a drooping mustache, gave him a wary look. Hey kid. Rooftops off limits. You need to head on down. Izuku couldn't form words. He just nodded, his throat tight. He unglued his fingers from the railing, leaving faint, sweaty prints on the metal. As he turned, he avoided the guard's gaze, his own eyes fixed on the scuffed tips of his red shoes. They were ridiculous shoes. They were the color of a hero's optimism. He felt like a fraud for wearing them. The walk home was a blur of detached misery. The vibrant city, usually a source of endless fascination for his analytical mind, was now just noise and light. The holographic advertisements flickered with images of heroes endorsing everything from soft drinks to insurance. Endeavor's stoic, fiery face glared from a billboard. Best Jeanist offered a suave smile from a boutique window. Each image was a salt flake ground into his open wound. They were members of a club he was permanently barred from. He passed a mother and her young son. The boy held an All Might action figure, making it fly through the air with whooshing sounds. I'm gonna be just like him, Mommy! The boy chirped. The mother smiled, ruffling his hair. I know you will, sweetie. Your zoom quirk will be perfect for it. Izuku flinched as if struck. He quickened his pace, ducking his head, the burn of unshed tears hot behind his eyes. He remembered his own mother, her face etched with sorrow, wrapping her arms around his small, shaking 4-year-old body in front of a computer screen. I'm sorry, Izuku! I'm so sorry! He had needed her to say something else. He had needed her to say, you can still be a hero! She never had. No one ever had. And now, All Might himself had confirmed it. The verdict was final. His autopilot feet, so used to this route, took a strange, unplanned turn. He didn't head for the familiar street that led to his apartment complex. Instead, he found himself walking towards the coast, towards the one place in the city that felt as broken and discarded as he did, Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It hadn't been a park for years. It was a monument to apathy, a shoreline choked with decades of illegal dumping, mountains of rusted appliances, tangled webs of rebar, soggy furniture, and countless tons of miscellaneous trash formed a new, artificial topography. The place stank of brine, rust, and rot. The setting sun, a magnificent sphere of orange and purple, cast long, dramatic shadows across the garbage heaps, creating a landscape of grotesque, surreal beauty. It was the perfect graveyard for a dead dream. He found a relatively stable pile of debris, a broken washing machine slumped against a stack of tires, and sank down, his backpack slumping beside him. The sound of the waves was a constant, mournful rhythm, lapping against a shore made not of sand, but of shattered plastic and smoothed over glass. He was utterly alone. This was it. The end of the line. Everything he had ever worked for, every note he had ever taken, every push-up, every ounce of desperate effort, had been for nothing. Kaken was right. All the kids who had ever mocked him were right. He was useless. A Deku. Someone who could do nothing. He looked up at the sky, the last vestiges of daylight surrendering to the encroaching dark. The first few stars began to prick the deep violet canvas. They were distant, cold, and ancient, observers to his tiny, insignificant tragedy. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped his lips, a sound more like a sob. For his entire life, people had wished on stars. For a new bike, for a good grade, for a crush to notice them. He had one wish. It was the same wish he'd had every single day since he was 4 years old. I want to be a hero. The thought wasn't a plea. It wasn't a prayer. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of his very being, even as that being was crumbling. He squeezed his eyes shut. I don't care how. I don't care what it takes. I just want to be able to save people. To help them. To be someone who can stand up and make a difference. Please. He didn't know who he was pleading with. God? The universe? The memory of All Might? It didn't matter. It was the desperate, final cry of a dying hope. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just another star, a little brighter than the others. Then it grew. It wasn't streaking across the sky in a predictable arc like a meteor. It was descending. It swelled from a pinprick to a marble to a blazing orb, its color a shade of green so deep and vibrant it seemed to tear a hole in reality. It was the green of new spring leaves, of deep forest moss, of his own wild, unruly hair, all intensified 1,000 times. It pulsed. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his despair momentarily forgotten, replaced by a primal, analytical awe. That wasn't a meteor. Meteors didn't slow down. They didn't change course with the smooth, deliberate grace of a predator. This object was moving with purpose, falling from the heavens directly towards his stretch of the coastline. His mind, the same mind that catalogued quirks and predicted hero movements, kicked into overdrive. It was too small for a catastrophic impact, but it was still an unknown object moving at high velocity. It was dangerous. His first thought wasn't for himself. It was for the slim, infinitesimal chance that someone else was on this godforsaken beach. I have to warn them. He was about to shout, to scream a warning into the empty air, when the object made its final maneuver. It angled sharply, arcing down towards a clearer patch of sand and garbage-strewn shore about 100 meters away. And then, the strangest thing happened. There was no thunderous boom. No fiery explosion. There was only silence. A wave of emerald light, silent as a dream, expanded outwards from the impact point. It washed over the mountains of trash, painting them in its impossible hue for a single, breathtaking second. The light wasn't hot, it carried no concussive force. It passed through Izuku like a ghost, and for a fraction of a moment, he felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the ground had dropped out from under him. Then, as quickly as it came, the light imploded, collapsing back into its point of origin and vanishing, leaving behind only the dim twilight and the afterimage of vibrant green burned into his retinas. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. The waves seemed to have stopped. The wind died. The world held its breath. Izuku stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. What was that? A new type of weapon? A villain with a light-based quirk? A natural phenomenon no one had ever documented? His legs began to move. He didn't tell them to. The same stupid, heroic instinct that had propelled him towards the sludge villain now took control again. It overrode the fear, the common sense that screamed at him to run in the opposite direction. Someone could be hurt. There could be a pilot. Someone might need help. It was the core tenet of his being, the one thing that hadn't been shattered on the rooftop. When someone might be in trouble, you run towards them. He stumbled and scrambled over the treacherous terrain, his sneakers slipping on slick plastic bags and catching on twisted metal. "Hello?" he called out, his voice thin and shaky. "Is anyone there? Are you okay?" Only the belated, startled cry of a distant gull answered him. He reached the impact site. It wasn't a smoking crater of charred earth. It was a perfectly smooth, shallow bowl in the sand, about 10 feet in diameter. The sand within the bowl wasn't hot. In fact, a faint, unnatural chill seemed to radiate from it. The air shimmered, distorting the shapes of the trash heaps beyond, like the heat haze above summer asphalt, but cold. And in the exact center, where the object had landed, lay the source. It was not a piece of rock or twisted metal. It was a crystal, roughly the size of his own clenched fist, resting on the sand. It pulsed with a soft, internal, emerald green light, the rhythm slow and steady like a sleeping heart. It wasn't cut with facets like a jewel. Its surface was impossibly smooth, yet it seemed to contain an infinite, complex geometry within it. As he stared, mesmerized, he thought he could see patterns swirling inside, the spiral arms of a galaxy, the delicate lacework of a nebula, the fiery corona of a sun. But it was the sound, or what his brain interpreted as sound, that rooted him to the spot. There was no audible noise, yet a low, powerful hum vibrated directly in his skull, in his bones. It was a frequency of pure emotion. And the emotions it carried were the most desolate things he had ever felt. Loneliness. A vast, cosmic solitude that spanned eons. The feeling of floating in an endless, starless void, utterly and completely alone. Grief. A sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight. The grief of watching your entire world, your home, everything you had ever known, burn and die and scatter to dust. Desperation. A frantic, ancient yearning. A desperate need to hold on, to survive, to not fade into the silent nothingness. The crystal was crying out. It was a dying entity, lost and afraid, and it had fallen to earth. Izuku took a hesitant step closer. His analytical mind, though rattled, was still working. This was impossible. It defied physics, biology, and quark theory. Quarks were a biological function, tied to the quark factor in human DNA. This was something else. This was alien. He knelt at the edge of the crater, the cold radiating from the sand seeping through the knees of his pants. The emotional hum grew stronger, and a new feeling was added to the mix. A flicker of hope, a sense of recognition? The crystal's light seemed to brighten, its pulsing quickening as he drew near. It felt like it was looking at him. It found me, he thought, the idea so wild it bordered on insanity. It didn't just fall. It came here. For me. Why? Because he was here? Because he was the only one who saw? Or was it because of the wish? The raw, hopeless desperation he had poured out into the night sky just moments before. Had this dying thing heard his dying dream? His hand began to tremble as he lifted it, reaching out. Part of him was screaming in terror. This could be radioactive. It could be a trap. It could vaporize him. But the part of him that ran towards villains, the part of him that felt a kinship with the overwhelming loneliness emanating from the crystal, was stronger. It was lost and alone. He was lost and alone. They were the same. His fingertips, shaking, brushed against the crystal's impossibly smooth surface. It wasn't solid. The moment he made contact, the crystal dissolved. It didn't shatter or explode, it unraveled. The fist-sized object transformed into a swirling river of pure, emerald light and raw energy. The stream twisted in the air for a half-second, a serpent of liquid starlight, before it shot forward and plunged directly into the center of Izuku's chest. There was no pain. There was only sensation. It was ice and fire. It was the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean and the weightless freedom of the void. It was the sound of a billion stellar nurseries birthing stars and the silent scream of a black hole devouring a galaxy. His nervous system lit up like a switchboard hit by lightning. The stream of light flooded his veins, not flowing with his blood but alongside it, a parallel, celestial circulatory system. He felt it map his body, every cell, every strand of DNA, learning him, knowing him. And then came the visions. They weren't thoughts or memories. They were raw, unfiltered data poured directly into his consciousness. He saw the birth of a star, a slow-motion collapse of dust and gas over millions of years, igniting into a glorious blue-white giant. He felt its life, the steady fusion in its core, the planetary system that bloomed around it, teeming with lifeforms he couldn't comprehend. He felt the entity's purpose, to be a guardian, a linchpin, a source of life and balance for its children. Then he saw the end. A horror from the black spaces between galaxies, a thing of non-light and wrong angles, a devourer of realities. He felt the star's terror and defiance as it fought, pouring out its energy in solar flares the size of solar systems. He felt its heart-wrenching failure as its planets were consumed, its light choked out, its very existence shattered. He felt the core, the consciousness, this last remnant, being flung across the cosmos, a grieving ember tumbling through the infinite dark for a time beyond human measurement. He felt its energy fading, its consciousness dissolving, its final, desperate act, to find a vessel, any haven, to preserve what little was left. To not die alone. It was too much. The sheer scale of time, of grief, of power. His 15-year-old human mind buckled under the strain. A strangled gasp escaped his lips, his eyes rolling back in his head. The last thing he felt before the darkness claimed him wasn't his own fear or pain. It was a new feeling, overlaid on his own, settling deep into his soul like a foundation stone of granite. It was ancient, it was absolute, and it was not his own. It was the unshakable, overwhelming weight of duty. Izuku Midoriya collapsed face first onto the cold, strange sand of Dagoba Beach, his dream of being a hero dead, and the legacy of a fallen star just beginning to stir in his veins. The first sensation was grit. It was in his mouth, a fine, sandy paste on his tongue. It was in his hair, a scratchy annoyance against his scalp. It was everywhere. A dull, throbbing ache had settled in his bones, the kind of deep weariness that comes from sleeping on a hard, unforgiving surface. His cheek was pressed against something cold and yielding. Sand? Sand? Izuku's eyes fluttered open. The world was a blurry mess of dark shapes against the sky that was no longer the deep violet of twilight, but the bruised purple and faint gray of pre-dawn. The rhythmic shushing of waves filled his ears. His mind, sluggish and thick with sleep, struggled to connect the dots. Rooftop. All Might, walking home. Then it hit him, a jolt stronger than any alarm clock. The light. The green light. He shot up into a sitting position, his head swimming with vertigo. He wasn't in his bed. He was on the beach. That beach. Dagoba. The mountains of trash loomed around him like sleeping, rust-colored behemoths. And there, just a few feet away, was the smooth, shallow bowl in the sand. It was real. The crater was real. It wasn't a dream, he whispered, his voice raspy. He scrambled to his feet, dusting sand from his uniform with frantic, trembling hands. His backpack was lying beside the spot where he'd collapsed, miraculously untouched. He looked down at himself. He was fine. No burns, no injuries, just a profound soreness and the clinging stench of salt and decay. But something was wrong. No, not wrong. Different. It was a hum. It wasn't a sound his ears could hear, but a vibration that seemed to originate from the very marrow of his bones. A low-frequency thrumming, a gentle but persistent current of energy flowing just beneath his skin. It was a feeling of presence, of fullness. For his entire life, especially after his quirkless diagnosis, he had carried a subtle, subconscious sense of emptiness, a hollow space inside him where a power should have been. Now, that space was not just filled, it was occupied. It felt like a quiet generator had been switched on in the core of his being. He pressed a hand to his chest, right over his sternum. The vibration was strongest there. It pulsed in time with his frantic heartbeat, a bizarre duet of human biology and something other. The memories of the impact, the visions, came flooding back, not as a dream but as a memory. The birth of a son, the grief of a guardian, the terror of annihilation, the eons of lonely travel through the void. It was too much. It felt like someone had downloaded the entire history of a lost civilization directly into his brain. He had to get home. He had to think. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, the familiar weight doing little to ground him. He gave the strange crater one last, terrified look before turning and clambering over a pile of discarded electronics, his feet finding purchase on a broken television screen. The journey back to the street was a surreal ordeal. Every step felt strange. It began with a wave of emotion that was distinctly not his own. As he crested a hill of garbage and saw the vast, dark expanse of the ocean stretching to the horizon, a pang of sorrow so immense and ancient struck him that it brought tears to his eyes. It was a grief deeper than his own recent heartbreak, a sorrow for lost worlds and forgotten stars. It wasn't his sadness, but he felt it as if it were. It was an echo, a memory of feeling that now lived inside him. He stumbled, catching himself on a rusted car door, gasping as the wave of cosmic grief slowly receded, leaving the shores of his mind quiet once more. Then came the new senses. He looked at the distant streetlights of the waking city. Before, they were just points of illumination. Now, he could almost feel them. He perceived the light not just as something he saw, but as a tangible substance, a flowing river of particles pouring from a source. He could sense the energy in it, the heat, the sheer presence of the photons on their journey. He blinked, shaking his head. It was like his vision had gained a new, overwhelming layer of information. And then there was gravity. As he finally set foot on the solid pavement of the street, the sensation was so jarring he nearly fell. He had always known gravity existed, the way one knows the sky is blue. But now he felt it. He felt the immense, gentle, constant pull of the entire planet on his body, a network of invisible, unbreakable threads connecting every molecule of his being to the Earth's core. He looked at a parked car and could sense its mass, the way it dented the fabric of space-time around it, the anchor of its weight pulling it down. He felt the subtle gravitational pull of a nearby telephone pole, the building next to it, the moon hidden by the morning light. The world was no longer a collection of objects. It was a complex dance of forces and energies, and he had suddenly been given the sheet music. A cold terror mixed with a dizzying awe washed over him. This thing, this fallen star, hadn't just given him visions. It had rewired his perception of reality. The walk home was a trial. He kept his head down, trying to block out the overwhelming sensory input. The presence in his mind, the source of the grief, remained quiet, but it was there. A silent passenger. He named it, in the privacy of his thoughts, with the first word that drifted up from the well of shared memories, Nova. It wasn't a name, more of a descriptor, the memory of a star that had exploded in defiance and sorrow. He reached his apartment building just as the sun was beginning to properly crest the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He fumbled with his keys, his hands still shaking, and managed to let himself in with a quiet click. The apartment was silent. His mom was probably still asleep. He tiptoed to his room, eased the door shut behind him, and leaned against it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the steady, alien hum in his chest. He was home. He was safe. But his room, his sanctuary, felt alien. The walls were a shrine to a dead god. All Might posters covered every available inch of space. All Might in his Silver Age costume, his Bronze Age costume, his modern suit. All Might smiling, All Might punching, All Might standing tall as the symbol of peace. Yesterday, these posters had been his inspiration. Now, they felt like a mockery. The smiling faces seemed to be looking at him with that same pity from the rooftop. Be more realistic, the hum in his chest pulsed, and a wave of pure, undiluted protective instinct surged through him. It was a fierce, primal warmth that pushed back against the cold tendrils of his despair. It was not his own feeling, but it resonated with the deepest part of his soul, the part that had sent him running toward the sludge villain. It felt like a silent, powerful reassurance. You are not useless. The doorknob rattled softly. Izuku? Is that you, honey? I thought I heard the door. Izuku froze, his blood turning to ice. Yeah, Mom. It's me. He squeaked, his voice cracking. The door opened a crack, and his mother, Inko Midoriya, peeked in. Her face was etched with worry, her eyes scanning him up and down. Izuku, where have you been? I woke up a little while ago, and you weren't here. I was about to call your school. You look exhausted. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't say, Mom, my dreams were crushed by my idol, so I went to the city dump where I was chosen as the living vessel for a dying cosmic entity. She would have him committed. I'm sorry, Mom, he mumbled, casting his eyes down. I was so caught up in studying for the entrance exams. I went to the public library and I must have fallen asleep in one of the study carrels. The security guard woke me up this morning. It was a weak lie, but it was the best he could come up with. His mother's expression softened from worry to a mixture of sympathy and concern. Oh, sweetie. You're pushing yourself too hard, she said, stepping in to gently brush some of the remaining sand from his shoulder. Sand? Was the library that dirty? Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. They were doing some renovations. It was dusty, Inko sighed, choosing not to press the issue. Well, get some rest, okay? You have school. And please call me if you're going to be out that late again. You had me worried sick. I will, Mom. I promise. I'm sorry, he said, the apology feeling wholly inadequate for the scale of his deception. She gave him a soft smile, patted his cheek, and quietly closed the door, leaving him alone with his impossible secret. He shed his sandy uniform, dumping it in his hamper and promising himself he'd deal with the evidence later. After a quick, silent shower where the feeling of the water hitting his skin was another new, bizarrely complex sensation, he changed into his pajamas and sat on the edge of his bed. His room. His life. His body. None of it felt entirely his own anymore. His gaze fell upon his desk, cluttered with notebooks and pencils. And there, standing proudly amongst the clutter, was his favorite 10-inch premium All Might action figure, the Silver Age edition. He had saved up for 2 months to buy it. It depicted the hero with his hands on his hips, a boisterous, indomitable smile on his face. Izuku reached for it, his fingers tracing the plastic contours of the cape. Yesterday, this object had represented everything he wanted to be. Today, it represented everything he was told he couldn't be. A wave of his own bitterness, sharp and fresh, washed over him. The hurt from All Might's words was still a raw, open wound. His hand trembled, a tremor born of grief and anger. The tremor was enough. His clumsy fingers knocked the figure off the desk. No! He gasped, a purely instinctual reaction. Time seemed to slow down. As the plastic hero tumbled through the air, end over end, Izuku's hand shot out, not to catch it, but in a desperate, silent plea. Don't break. Please don't break. Not this, too. And it didn't. 1 foot from the floor, the All Might figure stopped. Just stopped. It hung suspended in the air, perfectly still, as if frozen in a snapshot of its fall. Around it, the air shimmered with a faint, almost imperceptible distortion, like heat haze on a summer road, but tinged with the faintest whisper of emerald green. Izuku stared, his breath caught in his throat. His mind, which had been a chaotic storm of emotion and fear, went utterly, completely silent. There was only the sight of his idol, hanging in the air, defying the one law of the universe he now felt so intimately. Gravity. Slowly, shakily, he lowered his outstretched hand. The figure remained where it was. He raised his hand. It stayed put. He took a hesitant step to the side. The shimmering field held it firm. He could feel it now, a tautness in his mind, a focused stream of something flowing from him to the figure. It wasn't physical effort. It was like flexing a muscle he never knew he had, a muscle made of pure concentration. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Okay, Izuku. Analyze. The hero analyst in him, the core of his personality, took over from the terrified boy. Observation. The object is suspended. It is surrounded by a visible spatial distortion. The effect is linked to my mental state, initiated by a moment of panic and desire. Question. Is it under my control? He focused on the figure. He imagined it rising. He willed it to rise. The figure twitched, then slowly, jerkily, it drifted upwards an inch. A strangled noise, half gasp, half laugh, escaped his lips. He did it again, focusing harder. This time, the movement was smoother. The All Might figure floated up until it was level with his eyes, bobbing gently in the air like a balloon. The hum in his chest intensified, a low thrum of power being actively used. He released his focus, cutting the mental thread. The shimmering field vanished, and the figure clattered to the wooden floor with a plastic clack that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Izuku sank to his knees, his own legs suddenly unable to support him. He stared at the fallen toy, then at his own trembling hands. It was real. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. That dying star, Nova, hadn't just moved into his soul, it had given him its power. Or a piece of it. The ability to control gravity. The thought was so immense, so world-shattering, that he felt lightheaded. For 10 years he had been quirkless. Powerless. An outcast. And now he possessed a power that, as far as he knew, didn't exist anywhere on Earth. There were quirks that manipulated gravity, like Uraraka's zero gravity, but they required touch and had clear limitations. This was different. This was telekinetic control over a fundamental force of the universe. He had to know more. He had to understand. He scrambled back to his desk, ignoring the All Might figure on the floor. His hands moved with a new purpose. He grabbed a pen, then a mechanical pencil. He held the pencil over his palm and focused. He felt that mental muscle engage, felt the hum in his chest throb. The pencil lifted from his skin, floating an inch above his hand. He made it spin. He made it flip end over end. He made it dance in the air, the movements growing more precise as he learned the feel of the power. It was exhilarating. It was terrifying. He tried his phone next. It was heavier, more mass. He had to concentrate harder, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. But it, too, lifted from the desk, surrounded by that faint, emerald-tinted shimmer. He could feel its weight not in his hand, but in his mind. It was a tangible mental pressure. After a minute, his head began to ache, and he let it drop back to the desk with a soft thud. There were limits. It took energy. Mental energy. He leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling with the implications. A power. He had a power. A real one. The dream he had been forced to bury less than 12 hours ago was suddenly, impossibly, clawing its way out of its grave. Can someone without a quirk become a hero? All Might's answer had been no. But was he without a quirk? This didn't feel like a quirk. The visions, the hum, the alien emotions, quirks were biological. They were part of you. This felt like a tool he was holding, a passenger in his body. It was an external force, channeled through him. Aizawa's erasure quirk, which worked by shutting down the quirk factor in a person's body. Would it even work on this? A new wave of emotion washed over him, but this one wasn't grief or loneliness. It was Nova's protective instinct, but it was colored by his own fierce, newfound hope. It was a feeling of resolve, a sense of purpose. His hands, acting on an instinct that was not entirely his own, reached for their most familiar comfort object, his hero analysis notebook. He flipped it open to a fresh page, pen poised. For a decade, these notebooks had been filled with analyses of other people's powers. Now, for the first time, he was going to analyze his own. He would call it graviton, or maybe starfall. He would document its limits, its applications, its potential for rescue work. But his hand didn't move to write his own name. The pen, held tight in his grip, touched the paper. And it began to move. It wasn't his handwriting. His own was a messy, frantic scrawl. This was elegant, precise, and utterly alien. The pen flowed across the page with an unnerving confidence, his arm and wrist merely a conduit for a will that was not his. He didn't draw a diagram of himself with energy flowing from his hands. He drew a star chart. He stared, dumbfounded, as his own hand sketched a cluster of stars in a formation he had never seen before. It labeled them with symbols that were not of any human language. Underneath, it drew a complex diagram showing the curvature of spacetime, a two-dimensional grid warped by the mass of a celestial body. Then, his hand began to write equations. G mu nu equals 8 pi g slash ct mu nu, L equals 1/2 integral, del mu phi m superscript 2 phi superscript 2, dx. They were formulas for general relativity, for quantum field theory, for concepts so far beyond his middle school physics curriculum that they might as well have been magic spells. He didn't understand them. He couldn't have even begun to comprehend them. But the knowledge was there, flowing from Nova's ancient consciousness through his arm and onto the page. He was a scribe, taking dictation from a god. Page after page filled with celestial mechanics, with diagrams of nebulae, with the life cycle of stars, with theories on light and matter and the fundamental forces that bound the universe together. The section titled Hero Analysis for the Future was rapidly becoming a textbook on astrophysics written by an alien. Finally, after filling 5 pages with knowledge he didn't possess, his hand stopped. He stared down at the notebook, at the elegant, alien script and the incomprehensible diagrams. The pen fell from his numb fingers. The truth of his situation settled upon him, cold and absolute. He hadn't just been given a power. He had been joined with one. The entity within him wasn't just a passenger. It was a co-pilot, and it knew things. It had memories, instincts, and a deep, instinctual understanding of the cosmos that was now bleeding into his own reality. He looked from the star charts in his notebook to the All Might posters on his wall. His old dream, the simple, childish dream of being a hero just like him, was dead and buried. The rooftop had been the funeral. But here, in the quiet of his room, surrounded by alien knowledge and feeling the hum of a dying star in his chest, a new dream was being born. It wasn't simple. It wasn't childish. It was terrifying, and it was magnificent. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was quirkless. But he was also the vessel for the last remnant of a cosmic guardian. He was a boy who had wished on a dying star, and the star had answered. He didn't know what path lay ahead of him, or if it would lead to heroism. But for the first time since he was 4 years old, there was a path. And it stretched all the way to the stars. The 10 months that followed the incident on Dagobah Beach were the strangest, most difficult, and most exhilarating of Izuku Midoriya's life. The world had not changed, but his perception of it had been fundamentally and irrevocably altered. Every day was a lesson in control, a tightrope walk between his mundane life as a middle school student and his secret life as the vessel for a cosmic consciousness. His training was not the grueling physical regimen he had once imagined. It was a silent, mental battle waged in the quiet hours of the night and the desolate landscape of the city's forgotten shore. He returned to Dagobah Beach, not out of morbid curiosity, but because it felt like his laboratory. It was the only place he could practice without fear of being seen, the only place that felt like his own. He did not lift weights. He lifted refrigerators. The first time he tried, standing before a rust-pocked, hulking fridge half buried in the sand, the effort was immense. He focused, channeling the hum in his chest, the power he now associated with Nova. The air around the appliance shimmered with a faint emerald haze. A low-grade headache bloomed behind his eyes. He could feel the object's immense mass, its stubborn inertia, a dead weight not on his muscles but on his mind. He poured his will into it, picturing it rising. For a full minute, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the refrigerator shifted, scraping against the sand. It lifted 1 inch. Then 2. The strain was incredible. Blood trickled from his nose, and the world swam in his vision. He let go of his focus, and the fridge slammed back down with a deafening crash that sent a flock of gulls scattering into the dawn sky. He had held it for less than 10 seconds. It was a start. His training became a delicate dance of physics and willpower. Nova, the silent passenger, was not a simple power source, it was a tutor. When Izuku focused, echoes of its ancient knowledge would surface. He didn't just will objects to move, he learned to perceive their gravitational fields and create localized counterfields, null-gravity pockets where he could nudge them with minimal effort. He wasn't lifting the trash. He was making the trash forget how to be heavy. Slowly, methodically, he began to clean the beach. He would levitate a tangled mass of rebar and rusted pipes, guiding it gently to a pile he designated for scrap metal. He would suspend a dozen car tires in the air at once, a floating necklace of rubber, and deposit them in another section. The work was mentally exhausting. After an hour, he would be spent, collapsing onto a patch of newly cleared sand with a splitting headache and a profound sense of accomplishment. He was not just training his power, he was fulfilling a duty to the place where his new life had begun, turning a symbol of neglect into one of reclamation. He also explored the other facet of his abilities, light. He started small, trying to bend the morning sunlight as it reflected off a shard of broken glass. The first 100 attempts resulted in nothing but frustration. But then, one morning, he got it. For a split second, the glint of light twisted, bending at an impossible 90-degree angle before straightening out. He learned to sustain it, creating tiny, shimmering distortions in the air, mirages woven from willpower. He could create blinding flashes from ambient light, or wrap a small area in a cloak of warped light that made it difficult to see, like looking through moving water. Throughout it all, Nova was there. Its presence was a constant, a quiet hum in the background of his thoughts. It shared its loneliness during the quiet moments, its ancient grief when he looked at the stars, and its fierce, guardian instinct whenever he felt his own resolve falter. They developed a strange, silent symbiosis. Izuku provided the human context, the heroic drive, the desire to use this power for good. Nova provided the raw energy and the cosmic understanding of how that energy worked. Izuku was the will, Nova was the way. He still filled his notebooks, but the content changed. Alongside frantic analyses of hero tactics, there were now precise, elegant diagrams of gravitational lensing and notes on photon manipulation, written in his own hand but with an unnerving clarity that felt alien. He was building his own heroic identity from the ground up, one based not on punches and kicks, but on the fundamental laws of the universe. When the day of the UA entrance exam finally arrived, Izuku was a knot of contradictions. He was still the same anxious, stuttering boy who had idolized heroes his entire life. The sight of the colossal UA, high building, a monument to his dreams, made his knees tremble. But beneath the anxiety, there was a new, quiet current of resolve. It wasn't confidence in himself, but faith in the power he now wielded. He wasn't just Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless kid. He was something more. Out of my way, Deku! The voice, harsh and familiar, cut through his all. Katsuki Bakugo shoved past him, not even bothering to look back. Bakugo's expression was a thunderous mask of arrogant determination. Don't even think about it. You're less than a pebble. You'll just trip and die. The old Izuku would have flinched, would have curled in on himself, a reflexive apology already on his lips. But as the familiar spike of fear went through him, it was met by a calm, steadying wave from within. The ancient, unshakable presence of Nova met Bakugo's fleeting teenage aggression and found it quaint, insignificant. Izuku didn't flinch. He just stood his ground, watching his former friend storm towards the entrance. He felt a pang of pity for him, a feeling so foreign in the context of their relationship that it startled him. As he took his own hesitant step forward, his foot caught on an uneven paving stone. He pitched forward, a clumsy, humiliating fall about to happen in front of everyone. But before he could hit the ground, he felt a sudden weightlessness. "Whoa, are you okay?" A bright, cheerful voice asked. He was floating. A girl with rosy cheeks and a brown bob haircut had a hand on his back, her fingertips glowing faintly pink. She had stopped his fall. "It's my quirk. Sorry for using it without asking, but it would be bad luck to fall right before the exam, right?" He scrambled to get his feet back under him, his face burning. "Thank you. I'm sorry. I should have watched where I was going." She patted him on the back, releasing her quirk. "It's all good. I'm just super nervous. We've got this, though. Good luck. She gave him a brilliant smile and hurried inside. Uraraka Ochako. He recognized her from the school rosters. Her quirk was zero gravity. A fascinating application, he thought, his analyst brain kicking in, though limited by touch and a weight capacity that could induce nausea. His own power felt like the vast, complex ocean to her simple, useful river. The written exam was a blur. Izuku's mind, already sharp and analytical, felt supercharged. Complex problems in math and physics seemed to unfold in his head with a strange, intuitive clarity. He felt Nova's passive influence, the echoes of its cosmic knowledge helping him see the patterns and logic. He finished with time to spare, his hand aching but his mind calm. Then came the practical. He stood with a massive crowd of other hopefuls before a set of towering gates. President Mike was on a high platform, his voice booming over the speakers, explaining the rules. 1, 2, and 3-point robots. Villain points for destruction. Izuku's heart sank. His entire strategy was built around not destroying things. It was about precision, control, and negation. How was he supposed to score points? A new wave of doubt washed over him. Maybe All Might was right. Maybe this kind of power, a power that didn't smash or blast, had no place in the world of heroes. Wrong, a feeling pulsed from within him. Not a word, but an absolute certainty. A guardian does not destroy. A guardian protects. There is more than one way to be strong. The gates slammed open. Gah! President Mike screamed. The test has started. There are no countdowns in a real fight. While everyone else stood stunned for a second, Izuku, jolted by Nova's silent urging, bolted. He ran into the sprawling cityscape of the exam site alone, his classmates still processing at the gate. The first robot he encountered was a one-pointer. It rolled towards him on treads, its single red eye glowing menacingly. Its machine guns whirred to life. Izuku's panicked instinct was to dodge, to hide. But his new instinct, honed over months of training, took over. He didn't run. He stood his ground, raised a hand, and focused. He didn't try to stop the bullets. He targeted the space just in front of the robot's treads. He poured his will into that single point, creating a small but intense gravity well. The effect was instantaneous and silent. The ground beneath the robot's left tread suddenly possessed the gravitational pull of a small moon. The tread was yanked downwards with immense force, digging into the pavement. The robot's forward momentum, now fighting against a fixed point, caused it to violently pivot and topple onto its side with a screech of tortured metal. It lay there, flailing uselessly, immobilized. 0 points. But he was safe. Izuku didn't wait. He ran, his mind racing. It worked. It was efficient. But it was worth nothing on the scoreboard. He saw other students engaging robots with spectacular displays of power. A boy with a naval laser blasted a 2-pointer to pieces. A student with exploding hands reminiscent of Bakugo blew a hole through a 3-pointer. The scoreboard in his mind was a demoralizing, blinking 0. He kept moving, a ghost in the machine of the exam. He saw a group of 3 1-pointers cornering another student. Before the robots could fire, Izuku, from a block away, focused on the ambient light around their optical sensors. He bent it, warped it, creating a blinding, disorienting flash. The robot's targeting systems went haywire for a crucial second, giving the other student the opening he needed to blast them apart. Izuku got no credit. The other student probably didn't even know he was there. But the student was safe. Nova's guardian instinct hummed with satisfaction inside him, even as his own human anxiety screamed at his lack of points. Minutes bled into one another. He had neutralized 3 robots by toppling them and had assisted other students half a dozen times with light distortions, but his official score remained a perfect, soul-crushing 0. He was surviving, but he wasn't succeeding. Doubt began to creep back in, cold and sharp. Was this all his power was good for? Clever tricks? Party lighting and making things fall over? And then the ground began to shake. A deep, groaning tremor ran through the entire battle center. Buildings swayed. The other students, mid-battle, froze, their faces turning from determination to sheer terror. From behind a skyscraper at the center of the city, something colossal began to rise. The 0-pointer. It was a monster of metal and wiring, a walking apocalypse that dwarfed the tallest buildings. Its head scraped the sky, its single red eye a malevolent sun. Its arms were the size of buses, ending in fists that could pulverize a city block. Less than 2 minutes remaining. President Mick's voice boomed, now laced with a manic glee. The unspoken message was clear: run. And they did. The stampede was instantaneous. Students who had been bravely battling three-pointers moments before were now sprinting for the exit, their faces pale with terror. Izuku was swept up in the tide, his own survival instinct screaming at him to flee. This thing was beyond him. His gravity tricks would be like trying to stop a freight train with a fishing net. He was running for his life, when he heard a cry. "Ow! My leg!" Izuku skidded to a halt, turning back against the flow of the retreating crowd. It was her. The nice girl from the entrance. Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned under a huge slab of concrete rubble, likely shaken loose by the zero-pointer's emergence. She was trying desperately to pull herself free, but it was no use, and the zero-pointer was moving towards her. Its massive head turned, its red eye fixing on the easy target. Its arm rose, a piston the size of a building preparing to slam down and obliterate her, and everything in a 50-foot radius. Time stopped. In that frozen moment, Izuku saw it all. He saw the girl's terrified face. He saw the descending fist. He heard All Might's voice in his head. "You can't be a hero!" He felt his own 10 years of despair, and then, he felt Nova. He felt the memory of a dying star fighting a cosmic horror to protect its worlds. He felt the ancient, absolute, unyielding mandate of a guardian: "You will not fail again." His legs moved. He ran not away from the zero-pointer, but directly towards it, towards Uraraka. The other students stared at him as if he were insane. "What is he doing?" Someone yelled. "It's suicide!" He didn't hear them. All sound faded away except for the thrumming in his chest, which now roared like a furnace. The world narrowed to 3 points: the girl, the descending fist, and himself. He couldn't stop the punch. He knew that. He didn't have the raw power to halt that much mass and momentum. But Nova's knowledge offered another solution. You don't have to stop a river. You just have to change its course. He stopped, planting his feet about 20 yards from Uraraka, placing himself directly in the path of the colossal fist. He raised both hands, his palms facing the descending shadow. He didn't focus on the fist itself. He focused on the empty space directly in front of it. He poured every ounce of his will, every drop of Nova's borrowed power, into that single patch of air. He wasn't creating a simple gravity well. He was doing something far more complex, something he had only seen in the alien diagrams in his notebook. He was warping the very fabric of space-time. The air between him and the fist began to shimmer, not with an emerald haze, but with a violent, transparent distortion. It was like a lens of pure force had materialized, bending the light passing through it. The buildings behind it seemed to liquefy and twist. The zero-pointer's fist, moving at incredible speed, slammed into the distortion. There was no sound of impact. No clang of metal on force field. There was only a silent, sickening lurch. The path of the fist, for a horrifying instant, bent. It curved in space, passing through the area where Uraraka lay trapped, its trajectory shifted by the gravity lens just enough to miss her entirely. The fist slammed into the ground 10 feet to her left, striking with the force of a meteor. The shockwave threw Izuku off his feet, but the attack had missed its target. He had bought her a second. It was all he needed. He scrambled back to his feet, blood already starting to drip from his nose from the sheer mental exertion. The zero-pointer was already drawing its arm back for another strike. He ignored it. His focus was now entirely on the slab of concrete pinning Uraraka's leg. It was massive, tons of reinforced rock. He couldn't lift it, not from this distance. But he didn't have to. He reached out with his power, not to create a well, but to do the opposite. He pictured the concrete slab and focused on its connection to the earth. He willed that connection to sever. He created a powerful, focused field of anti-gravity directly on the slab itself. The concrete groaned. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. The pressure on Uraraka's leg lessened. With a final, agonizing mental scream, Izuku yanked upwards with his power. The massive slab of rubble lifted into the air. It rose 5, then 10 feet, floating silently above the trapped girl, shedding dust and pebbles. Now! Get out! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. Uraraka didn't hesitate. She scrambled backwards, dragging her injured leg, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. The moment she was clear, Izuku's focus shattered. The strain was too much. The anti-gravity field collapsed, and the slab of concrete crashed back to the earth with a deafening boom. The world swam in a sea of black spots, his head felt like it was splitting in two, and the roar in his chest subsided back to a weak, exhausted hum. He staggered, falling to one knee, completely spent. A deafening siren blared across the cityscape. Time's up! The zero-pointer froze, its arm raised for another strike, and then slowly retracted, its red eye dimming. The exam was over. Silence fell across the battleground, broken only by the distant panting of exhausted students and the ringing in Izuku's ears. He was on his hands and knees, trying not to pass out. He had scored 0 villain points. He had failed. Then, a small figure was kneeling in front of him. It was Uraraka. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. You saved me, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. That was incredible. Thank you? Thank you so much. Before he could respond, she leaned over and threw up, a side effect of her own quirk overexertion combined with the terror. But even as she did, her eyes never left him, filled with an awe that he had never seen directed at him in his entire life. In a darkened observation room high above the city, a bank of monitors showed every angle of the exam. The mood was electric. Did you see that? President Mike yelled, leaping out of his chair. The little listener didn't even touch it. The punch just bent. What kind of quirk is that? Cementos, a thoughtful expression on his blocky face, stroked his chin. More importantly, he scored 0 villain points. His actions, while impressive, resulted in no disabled targets aside from a few he merely tipped over. By the official metrics. The metrics are insufficient, a dry, bored voice cut in. It was Shoto Aizawa, his eyes wide and alert for the first time all day. He rewound the footage on his personal monitor, watching the moment Izuku's power manifested. The spatial distortion. He zoomed in. That's not a quirk. All Might, in his skeletal form, stood silently at the back of the room, hidden in the shadows. He was shaking. He had watched the entire thing, his heart threatening to pound its way out of his emaciated chest. He had seen the boy he had dismissed, the boy he had told to be realistic, run towards the single most dangerous obstacle in the exam to save a complete stranger. He had performed an act of pure, selfless heroism with a power that defied all explanation. The boy hadn't used a strength enhancement quirk. He hadn't punched anything. He had thought his way out of an impossible situation. He had saved someone without throwing a single blow. Tashinori Yagi felt a profound sense of shame, followed by an overwhelming surge of awe. He's right, a cheerful, sing-song voice chirped. All heads turned to Principal Nizu, who was perched on his chair, his beady black eyes gleaming with an almost manic intelligence. He was staring at the main screen, a wide, unnerving smile on his furry face. That is not a quirk in any way we currently understand it, Nizu continued, pouring himself a cup of tea. It registers no known quirk factor energies. It appears to violate several known laws of physics. It's a complete unknown. He is, for all intents and purposes, an anomaly. He took a sip of his tea. And isn't it wonderful? He gestured to another screen, which was tallying the points. He may have 0 villain points. But we have another, lesser-known scoring system for just such an occasion. A way to reward true heroism, not just destructive capability. The screen flickered, and a new column appeared next to Izuku Midoriya's name. Rescue points. For preventing a fellow examinee from certain harm by neutralizing a threat rated at an impossible level, Nizu read aloud, his smile widening. And for the secondary, precise, and non-destructive rescue of said examinee from a fatal environmental trap, all while under extreme duress. Let's see. The number next to Izuku's name began to climb. 10, 20, 30. It kept going, far surpassing the highest villain point scores. It finally stopped at a nice, round 60. 60 rescue points, Niza declared, placing his teacup down with a soft click. More than enough to pass. Welcome to UA High, Izuku Midoriya, Aizawa grunted, still staring at his screen. You're letting a complete unknown with a power you can't identify into the school. Niza's grin was predatory. Aizawa, I'm not just letting him in. I'm putting him in your class. He turned his gaze to the monitor showing a still-dazed Izuku being helped by medics. An intelligent, unpredictable variable. A boy who saves people without fighting. A walking, talking puzzle wrapped in an enigma. He clapped his paws together softly. A 0-point anomaly. I can't think of anything more exciting. The letter from Yue arrived on a Tuesday. It was a simple, thick parchment-like envelope, stark white against the dark wood of the dining table where his mother had placed it. It felt heavier than a brick. Izuku stared at it, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This was it. The culmination of a lifetime of yearning and 10 months of impossible, secret training. His mother, Inko, hovered nervously by the kitchen doorway, wringing a dish towel in her hands. She had watched him for the past 10 months with a mixture of pride and confusion. She saw her son, once so withdrawn and despondent, develop a new, quiet intensity. She saw him come home from study sessions exhausted but with a look of profound accomplishment. She saw him clean Dagoba Beach single-handedly, a feat the local news had covered as a baffling act of vigilante community service. She had attributed it all to a desperate, last-ditch effort to prove himself. She was proud of his spirit, but terrified of the inevitable crash. Well? She prompted gently, her voice trembling. Aren't you going to open it? Izuku swallowed, the sound loud in the silent apartment. He picked up the envelope. His fingers brushed against the crisp red wax seal, shaped like the UA logo. Inside this paper shell was one of two futures: the validation of his new, terrifying path, or a final, definitive return to the crushing reality of being quirkless. The hum of Nova in his chest was a steady, low thrum, a silent observer to his human drama. It offered no prediction, only a feeling of unshakable presence. We are here. That is what matters. His fingers, surprisingly steady, broke the seal. A small, metallic disc fell out onto the table with a clatter. A projector, a holographic image flickered to life, and there, in a garish yellow suit, was All Might. I am here as a projection. The hero boomed. Inko gasped. Izuku felt the air leave his lungs. It was him. The man who had built him up and torn him down, now here to deliver the final verdict. All Might began his speech, explaining how he had come to teach at UA, a piece of information that made Izuku's head spin. He talked about the villain points, the obvious metric for success. Izuku's heart sank with every word. He knew his score there. 0. This was it. The polite rejection. But there's more to it, young man. All Might continued, his projected image leaning closer. The exam wasn't just about smashing robots. That would be biased against those with less flashy or combat-oriented quirks. There was another, hidden scoring system. The truest measure of a hero. Rescue points. The projection switched to a grainy security feed. Izuku saw himself, a tiny green-haired figure, staring down the impossible bulk of the zero-pointer. He saw the girl, Uraraka, trapped. He saw the fist descend. And he saw the air itself seem to bend and warp, a silent, miraculous deflection that still sent a shiver down his spine. He saw the rubble lift, freeing her. Your actions moved the judges. All Might declared, his voice thick with an emotion Izuku couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity. It was respect. To run toward danger to save another, without a thought for your own safety or personal gain, that is the essence of heroism. And so, we award you for it. Izuku Midoriya, 60 rescue points. The footage switched back to All Might, who pointed a finger directly at Izuku. And Uraraka Ochako, the young woman you saved, came to us after the exam. She asked if she could give you some of her points, a selfless act inspired by a selfless act. Tears were streaming down Izuku's face now, hot and silent. He hadn't failed. He hadn't failed. You have passed, young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice softening. Welcome. Your Hero Academia starts now. The projection flickered and died. The room was silent again, save for the sound of Inko's weeping. Izuku looked up to see his mother covering her face, tears pouring through her fingers. But these weren't the tears of sorrow he remembered from his childhood diagnosis. These were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Izuku, she sobbed, rushing to him and wrapping him in a hug so tight it felt like she was trying to fuse them together. Oh, Izuku! You did it! You did it! I'm so proud of you! I'm so proud! He hugged her back, burying his face in her shoulder, the years of pain and doubt and loneliness finally washing away in a cathartic flood. He had done it. They had done it. He and the lonely star that had fallen to earth. The first day of school was surreal. The Yui uniform felt like a costume, the crisp fabric unfamiliar and heavy with the weight of his own disbelief. Walking through the massive gates, not as a hopeful applicant but as an official student, sent a dizzying wave of vertigo through him. He found his classroom, 1A, the door comically oversized. It felt like the entrance to a new world. He took a deep breath, the hum of Nova calming presence, and slid the door open. The scene within was chaotic. A stern-looking boy with glasses and engines in his calves was admonishing a blond boy with his feet propped up on his desk. That boy was Bakugo. Of course. It had to be Bakugo. Their eyes met across the room. Bakugo's crimson gaze, which had been simmering with casual arrogance, instantly ignited into a wildfire of pure, unadulterated rage. Deku? Bakugo snarled, his voice a low growl that silenced the room. He slammed his feet to the floor and shot up, his palms already starting to pop and crackle with miniature explosions. What the hell are you doing here? The bespectacled boy, Ida Tenya, immediately chopped a hand towards Bakugo. This is a prestigious academy. Desks are not for feet, and threatening your classmates is unacceptable. Bakugo ignored him completely, stalking towards Izuku, who stood frozen in the doorway. I said, what are you doing here, you damn nerd? This school isn't for quirkless rejects. Did you cheat? Did you lie? How did a worthless pebble like you get in? The old Izuku would have been trembling, stammering, cowering. And part of him still was. The conditioned fear of a decade of bullying was a deep and ugly reflex. But another part of him, the part that was now fused with the calm, ancient consciousness of a star, stood its ground. He felt Nova's presence rise within him, not with aggression, but with a vast, patient stillness. It regarded Bakugo's explosive fury the way a mountain regards a thunderstorm, loud, violent, but ultimately temporary and insignificant against its own sheer scale of existence. This new stillness allowed Izuku to see Bakugo not as a monster, but as a confused, angry boy whose entire worldview had just been shattered. He saw the fear behind the rage, the fear that his own superiority, the one thing he clung to, was a lie. I passed the exam, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. It didn't even waver. This calm response was like gasoline on a fire. Passed? Bakugo roared, shoving his face close to Izuku's. Don't lie to me. I saw you. You didn't do a damn thing. You just ran around like a scared rat. There's no way you passed without a quirk. Hey! You're that plain-looking boy. A cheerful voice cut in. It was Uraraka, standing behind him in the doorway. You were amazing at the exam. That punch was incredible. Izuku's head snapped around. Punch? He hadn't punched anything. She must have seen the zero-pointer's fist get deflected and, in the chaos, assumed he had somehow punched it. The misunderstanding was already beginning. Before he could correct her, Ida was striding over, hand outstretched. I am Ida Tenya from Semi-Private Academy, he announced. Midoriya, correct? I must apologize for my conduct at the exam. You recognized the true nature of the practical test when I did not. You are clearly the superior student. I misjudged you. Izuku was drowning. Uraraka thought he had a super-strength quirk. Ida thought he was a master strategist. Bakugo thought he was a cheater. And he couldn't explain the truth to any of them. How could he? Actually, I'm the mortal vessel for a sentient, dying star core with limited control over gravity and light. They'd think he was insane. If you're all just here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave. The voice came from the floor. It was dry, exhausted, and utterly devoid of emotion. Everyone froze. Lying on the ground behind the teacher's podium, zipped into a yellow sleeping bag like a giant caterpillar, was a man with tired, bloodshot eyes and a scruffy beard. He unzipped himself and stood up, looking like he'd just woken up from a 3-day nap. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. He took a long, slow look around the room. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Nice to meet you. He reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a blue gym uniform. Put these on. Now. Meet me on the P grounds. The P grounds were bathed in the morning sun. Izuku stood in the loose-fitting gym uniform, feeling the familiar hum of Nova thrumming in time with his nervous heartbeat. The other students were murmuring, confused. A quirk apprehension test? Several of them exclaimed at once. But what about the entrance ceremony? The orientation? Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed. Yui isn't bound by pointless traditions, Aizawa said, his voice flat. You're in the hero course. You don't have time for that stuff. You all have been doing these since middle school, standardized fitness tests, but you weren't allowed to use your quirks. It's irrational. The country still pretends we're all born equal when we're not. He turned his gaze, and Izuku felt it lock onto him like a targeting system. Midoriya. You place first in the entrance exam. The class erupted in whispers. Izuku felt his face flush. First? He had thought he just scraped by. In middle school, what was your best result for the softball throw? Aizawa asked. At 42 meters, sir, Izuku stammered. Right, Aizawa said, tossing him a softball. Try it now with your quirk. This was it. The first public demonstration. Every eye in the class was on him. Bakugo's glare was hot enough to burn holes in his back. Izuku stepped into the circle, the ball feeling cool and solid in his hand. He could feel its small but distinct mass, its tiny indentation on the fabric of space-time. What do I do? He thought, his mind racing. Uraraka thinks I have a strength quirk. If I do some weird gravity thing, it'll raise questions. But if I try to punch it, I can't. That's not my power. Show them what is real. Nova's presence seemed to pulse, a feeling of calm, factual certainty. Deception is a fragile shield. Truth is a foundation. He took a deep breath. Aizawa and All Might had seen what he did at the exam. They already knew it wasn't a simple strength quirk. There was no point in hiding. He had to establish his own paradigm. He mimicked a standard throwing motion, but it was perfunctory. The real work was happening in his mind. As the ball left his fingertips, he did two things simultaneously. First, he wrapped the ball in a perfect, sustained field of zero gravity. It was no longer bound to the earth. Second, he imparted a single, powerful telekinetic push, a pure kinetic impulse, like the kick from a silent cannon. The ball shot upwards. It didn't arc. It didn't curve. It ascended in a perfectly straight, impossibly fast line, shrinking to a dot in the sky in less than a second before vanishing completely. The class was silent. Utterly silent. Aizawa stared at his phone, which was connected to the measuring device. After a long moment, a single, glowing symbol appeared on the screen, infinity. He held up the phone for the class to see. The silence broke into a cacophony of astonishment. Infinity? A spiky red-haired boy exclaimed. Seriously? What kind of quirk was that? Someone else yelled. It just left. Bakugo's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. His hands were smoking. He was vibrating with a rage that was now mixed with a terrifying, profound confusion. Seems fun, you say? Aizawa's voice cut through the noise, a sinister edge creeping into it. You have 3 years to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun? Fine. The student who places last in these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic gripped the class. This was their first day. It was insane. It was unfair. Welcome, Aizawa said with a cruel smirk. This is the hero course at UA High. He brushed his hair back. Now let the games begin. The first test, a 50-meter dash. Izuku was up against Ida and a frog-like girl named Tsuyu Azuri. Ida crouched into a sprinter's stance, the engines in his calves rumbling. The starting pistol fired. Ida shot forward like a bullet. But Izuku had his own plan. He didn't focus on running faster. He focused on the 50 meters of track in front of him. With a flicker of concentration, he warped the space, creating a subtle gravitational distortion that effectively shortened the distance he had to travel from his perspective. To the onlookers, it was bizarre. He wasn't moving with exceptional speed, but he seemed to lurch across the distance in great, unnatural bounds, covering ground far too quickly for his leg speed. The world seemed to ripple around him as he moved. He crossed the line in 3.01 seconds. Ida, with his engines, was just a fraction of a second behind. How did you do that? Ida demanded, his engine sputtering as he came to a halt. Your physical velocity was not that high, yet you outpaced me. It defies conventional physics. It's my quirk, Izuku mumbled, not daring to meet his eyes. Aizawa was watching him, his gaze dark and unreadable. One test down. Next, the grip test. Students were crushing the dynamometers with displays of raw strength. The boy with multiple arms, Shoji, got 540 kilograms. Izuku took the device, his hand trembling slightly. He couldn't physically crush it. His physical strength was average at best, so he didn't try. He held the device, closed his eyes, and focused. He ignored the handle and instead targeted the internal mechanism, the spring, the sensor, the very core of the machine. He didn't apply his own strength, he applied the strength of the planet. He created a tiny, hyper-focused gravity well inside the device, multiplying the force exerted on the internal plates 100-fold. The device's digital screen flickered wildly. The numbers climbed at an impossible rate, passing 500, 1,000, 1,500. A sharp crack echoed in the silent grounds. The screen went blank. Izuku said, opening his eyes. He held up the device. The handle was fine, but a thin crack ran across the screen, and a wisp of smoke curled from the seams. I think I broke it. Aizawa walked over and took the dead machine from his hand, his expressionless face betraying nothing. But Izuku could see it in his eyes. The suspicion was deepening. This wasn't the work of a super-strength quirk. It was something else. Something precise, internal, and surgical. He excelled in the other tests through similar means. For the standing long jump, he nullified his own gravity for a split second as he jumped, soaring over the sandbox entirely. For the side-to-side steps, he used microgravity fields to pull himself back and forth, moving with a fluid, pendulum-like motion that was eerie to watch. He was scoring high. Impossibly high. With each test, the whispers from his classmates grew louder, and the burning glare from Aizawa grew more intense. Izuku felt like an insect under a magnifying glass, and the sun was getting hotter. Finally, only one test remained, the ball throw for everyone else. It was his turn to watch. He saw Uraraka get an infinity score by making her ball weightless. He saw Bakugo launch his ball with a massive explosion, screaming "Die!" as it flew, scoring an impressive 705.2 meters. Deku, Bakugo snarled as he walked past, smoke wafting from his palms. What the hell is your quirk? You never had one. You were a worthless, useless nobody. Izuku started, but couldn't finish. You're going to tell me, Bakugo hissed, his voice dangerously low. After this, you and me? You're going to explain how a piece of trash like you learned to cheat his way into my school. The final student finished their throw. The tests were over. Izuku felt a wave of relief. He had survived. He had proven himself. Now he just had to survive Bakugo. Midoriya. Aizawa's voice was sharp. Izuku flinched. The teacher was walking towards him, his expression colder and harder than before. The other students fell silent, sensing the sudden tension. We're not done with you, Aizawa said, his voice dangerously quiet. I've been watching. Your results are illogical. They don't stem from a single, cohesive power. They're a collection of disparate, high-level reality warping effects. Space manipulation, gravity manipulation, kinetic impulse. A quirk like that, a power that versatile, should be registered. It should be famous. But there is no record of you. He stopped, standing directly in front of Izuku. "You're hiding something. Let's try that ball throw one more time." He held out another softball. But this time, do it without the parlor tricks. A cold dread washed over Izuku. He knew what was coming. "Throw it again," Aizawa commanded, and his eyes flared a terrifying, hellish red. His long black hair lifted from his shoulders, floating around his head as if underwater. His capture weapon, the woven bandages around his neck, began to stir. Erasure. Aizawa was using his quirk on him. The class gasped. They had all heard of their teacher's famous power. The ability to nullify any quirk just by looking at someone. Izuku felt a strange sensation, like a cold breeze washing over his skin. He felt Aizawa's power search him, probe him, looking for the biological key, the specific genetic component known as the quirk factor, to turn it off. And it found nothing. The hum in his chest didn't stop. The quiet, cosmic presence of Nova didn't fade. The newfound senses, the feeling of the planet's gravity, the awareness of the light from the sun, none of it vanished. Aizawa's power was a key searching for a lock that didn't exist. It was like trying to unplug a star. Aizawa's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He could feel it. The failure. His quirk, the one tool that had never failed him against any emitter or transformation quirk, had just hit a brick wall. "I said throw it," Aizawa repeated, his voice strained, his glare intensifying as if trying to force his power to work through sheer willpower. Izuku's hand was shaking as he took the ball. This was the moment of truth. Every head was turned towards him. He could feel Bakugo's burning stare, Uraraka's worried gaze, Ida's confused frown. He looked at Aizawa, at his floating hair and glowing red eyes, and he knew there was no hiding. He stepped back into the circle. His heart was a jackhammer. He took a breath. He mimicked the same throwing motion as before, a simple, unimpressive toss. And as the ball left his hand, he reached out with his mind, with Nova's power, the power that was still humming, alive and untouchable, within him. He severed its connection to gravity. He gave it the same telekinetic push, and for the second time that day, the ball ascended in a perfectly straight, impossibly fast line, disappearing into the vast blue emptiness of the sky. Silence, a dead, absolute silence fell over the grounds. Every student was frozen, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. They had seen Aizawa's power activate. They knew what it was supposed to do. And they had seen it fail. Aizawa's hair fell. The red glow in his eyes faded. His capture weapon settled back around his neck. His power receded not because he willed it, but because of sheer, unadulterated shock. His jaw was slack, his professional mask of apathy completely shattered, replaced by a look of stark, naked disbelief. "How?" he breathed, the word barely a whisper. "My quirk, it erases quirks. I was looking right at you. I had a lock." He took a step back, his eyes scanning Izuku not as a student, but as an impossibility, as a monster. "That power. It's not a quirk. It's not biological." He stared at Izuku, his expression hardening into something Izuku had never seen before, fear. "What are you?" Izuku couldn't answer. He just stood there, trembling, the secret he had guarded so closely now blown wide open in the most dramatic way possible. He hadn't just revealed his power, he had revealed that he was something other. Something that didn't play by the rules of their world. The tension was finally broken when Aizawa let out a long, slow breath and turned away, running a hand through his now limp hair. "The demonstration is over," he announced to the class, his voice regaining some of its weary authority, though it was now laced with a new, raw edge. He displayed the final scores on a projection. Izuku Midoriya was at the top. At the very bottom was a short, purple-haired boy who looked like he was about to faint. "And I was lying about the expulsion," Aizawa said, his back still to the class. "It was a rational deception to push you to your limits." The class erupted in cries of relief, except for a sharp-eyed girl who correctly pointed out the lie was obvious. But Izuku barely heard them. His world had narrowed to Aizawa, who was now walking back towards him, his expression grim. He stopped in front of Izuku, speaking in a low voice meant only for him. "We are going to talk. You, me, and the principal. After school. Do not be late." His eyes were dark pools of suspicion and something else, a flicker of professional curiosity that warred with his fear. Whatever you are, you're in my class now. That makes you my responsibility, and I will find out what you are. Aizawa turned and walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the circle, the ghost of his impossible power hanging in the air. The other students gave him a wide berth, looking at him with a new mixture of awe and fear. He was no longer just the kid with the amazing quirk. He was the kid whose quirk couldn't be erased. The anomaly. He looked up at the sky where the ball had vanished, a gateway to the endless, cold cosmos from which Nova had come. He had wanted to be a hero in a world of quirks, but he was learning that he, and the stardust in his veins, might not be part of that world at all.